Hey everybody, I'm Christopher Lee Jansen.
Hey guys, I'm Noah Flynn.
We are the founders of Crooked Path Paranormal, and this is the first episode of the Crooked Convos podcast. This episode is going to be all about us telling you about who we are, sharing our stories. So when you watch our movies, you know a little bit more about who we are and where we come from and why we do what we do. I'm going to have Noah go ahead and share his story first.
Hey guys, like Christopher said, I'm really excited to kind of kick off this podcast here, so you guys can kind of get a chance to get to know us a little bit more personally and understand why we do the crazy things that we do and kind of where we're at with our spiritual journeys together, along with this whole really weird paranormal investigating that we do. And to kind of start that off, we're going to talk about our personal stories. For me, it actually starts like really from the beginning, like from the time that I was born and I was a really young kid. I had a lot of really weird experiences when it came to the paranormal. Like one of my particular most famous stories among like my family, famous with my family because I'm not famous, but um, with my family was I had a babysitter. Well, I think I was about 4 or 5 years old at the time, and when my mom came to pick me up one day after work, the babysitter was all like like distraught, like didn't know what to do. And she's like, "Your son has gifts and abilities," and my mom was just kind of like, "What? What are you talking about?" And so she starts to explain the story. So what happened was, my babysitter and I were in the kitchen of her home, and she was making me something for lunch, I think. And I look over at her and I said, "Hey, if Paw is having some chocolate cake, I want some chocolate cake." And my babysitter looks at me and she's like, "What the hell are you talking about? Like, nobody's having chocolate cake." And so she kind of just brushed it off at first. And later in the day, while I think I was like sitting there playing with my dinosaur toys or something like that, she was looking through an old scrapbook that she had made, and her husband, who I did not know this again because like A, I was like 4 or 5 years old, and B, he passed away like years before I was even born. She was looking through an old scrapbook and she saw a picture that she had taken of him reaching in the fridge, grabbing a chocolate cake. And like so she just went like crazy over that, just the idea that like I possibly saw and was speaking to her dead husband was so weird. And then it kind of continues to like there's other stories of me like we would pass graveyards and I'd ask my mom and dad, and I'd be like, who are all those grandmas and grandpas out in the cemetery and stuff like that. And I remember seeing a black shadow figure pass um by my front door at my childhood home, and I remember seeing a dog at some point. Like there was like literally a million different paranormal stories with me that came to like experiences that I had when I was a kid. And as those became more and more frequent, I I started watching like all of the ghost shows like Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures, Paranormal Lockdown, just like Josh Gates and all of his like 30 shows. Like I started to really dive deep into my journey of the paranormal, and I got to experience that with my dad. Um, and it was such a really cool thing to me. Like I became really devoted to like wanting to learn more and more. And so a few years go by. Now I'm like in trying to remember exactly whenever I first started investigating, but I think I was like right around the age of 22. I want to say I would think I was like about 22 years old, and one of my absolute longtime best friends. We've been friends for like over 10 years. Gage Warrington and we were both super infatuated with the paranormal from experiences that we had had when we were kids up until our early 20s. And so we had this idea like wouldn't it be cool if we just bought some equipment, bought a little video camera or something, and we just go around some of these like these places that that they say are haunted. And so we started doing that. We created a group known as Belmont Paranormal Society, and so we started going around and trying to find evidence. And some of the things that we found were so prominent and so cool. It was almost like really validating for me, all the experiences that I had when I was a kid.
Wow. I don't even think I knew all of that. I knew pieces of that, but there's pieces of that that I've never even heard. So that was really cool.
Yeah. What about I'd love to hear your story and how you've kind of gotten started. I'm sure everybody else would as well.
Oh boy, here we go. So I don't ever remember a time in my life where I was not completely fascinated with ghosts and witches and really anything that is dark, scary, or horror related. I remember even as being a very young child being completely obsessed with the abandoned mausoleum down the street from our house. I mean, my friends and I would go hang out underneath a bridge where it was dark, or we just hang out in the park down the street from the abandoned mausoleum in the dark. It's just what we wanted to do.
Right.
When I was 10 years old, I was already absolutely horror obsessed, and I was gifted my first Ouija board, which those who know me, those who have investigated with me, those who know that I actually have my own edition Ouija board that I sell, know that Ouija boards are a big part of my life. Also, around that same time of being 10 years old, I felt the need to purchase my first deck of tarot cards. Not something that an average 10-year-old does with birthday money from grandma and grandpa.
No.
But I really needed a deck of tarot cards. And for the first couple years that I worked with them, I really just allowed myself to sit with the images and to start to take in how those images made me feel. It wasn't until a few years later that I really started to connect more deeply and learn the traditional meanings. But one of the most defining moments for me also occurred when I was 10 years old. I had a dream that a family friend of mine passed away, and she was a young, healthy 42-year-old woman. There was nothing wrong with her. There was no reason in the world for anyone to even be thinking about her passing away. And 3 days later, she died.
Oh, wow.
And I remember being 10 years old at her funeral and seeing her there in the casket, and also seeing her like she was standing next to me and talking to me. And all I really remember is that she was telling me that she was okay and that I was going to be okay.
Wow.
And that's not something that I shared with anyone for many, many years, really, until I started doing other podcasts. I never shared that story, never talked to my family about it. By the time I was about 20 years old, I was pretty deeply immersed in tarot and doing public readings and reading for clients. It wasn't until about 2016, actually, that I ever took the time to go on my first paranormal investigation. Now, by the time 2016 rolled around, I'd already fallen into what would become my spiritual path. I took my time finding my way in regard to my spiritual path, and essentially went through what one would call a few different religions before I settled into my spirituality. And it was somewhere in there in my early to mid 20s that I finally realized, I'm a witch.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pagan at that, and nature is very much a part of my spirituality. And once I started to own all of that, that's when all of the pieces really started to fall into place. That's when I started adding things like energy work and Reiki into my practice and hypnosis. By 2016, I had an office for spiritual advising, as well as another part to the building that was more or less a community center for the local pagan community, where we would do rituals and events and workshops and other fun things like that. But 2016 was probably my first paranormal investigation, and it was at the Randolph County Infirmary in Winchester, Indiana.
Wow.
I remember finishing that night, and throughout the course of the night, I connected with this wonderful woman. Unfortunately, I found out she passed away recently.
Oh.
She was also a medium, and just she and I had a blast going around that building together and connecting off of each other and finishing each other's sentences in regard to what we were seeing or feeling. Those that don't know me will know eventually that sometimes I see spirits, sometimes I hear them, sometimes I feel them, sometimes I just know. And how that plays out to me, I think it all depends on the amount of energy that a spirit has. It all depends on the amount of energy that I have in any given moment. But it was from that moment that I knew that the paranormal absolutely needed to be a part of my life.
Wow, that's so cool.
Well, in living in Milwaukee at the time and running my other businesses, one of which was also a dance studio, I didn't have time to do anything major with the paranormal. It
Right.
was in 2020 that I moved to Ohio, like the day before everything shut down. And it was probably in 2021, maybe 2022. I'm going to say early 2022, that I signed up to do readings at an event in Dayton.
Hmm.
And this woman came up to me. She was my very first reading of the day. And she said to me, next month, they're having a Paracon at the Fairfield County Infirmary in Lancaster. And me not
Oh,
being from Ohio, I went, well, where is that? So I looked it up and I'm like, oh, that's only about 35, 40 minutes from home.
right.
So I signed up to be a vendor and do readings there, and almost instantly got an invitation to kind of move in and be their house psychic. So that is one of the
Wow.
things that really means a lot to me, being the house psychic at the Fairfield County Infirmary. But it was taking that step into that building, into that role as their house psychic, that absolutely launched my journey into the paranormal.
Wow. It's funny, like what you said too, that I just like as you were saying it, it also kind of like sparked a memory in me as well. An experience that I had when I was a kid that was similar to what you just described about like basically seeing and knowing that a family member was going to pass away before they did. I had a similar experience like that when I was younger with my grandma Sandy. And this is a story as well that like not a lot of people actually know. Like I haven't been really public with it. I think I mean I know I've told you this story before. And I know like I've talked to my dad before about it. Um, but it was mainly because like for a lot of years I struggled with understanding it because like I was like if I start telling people that like I knew how my grandmother was going to die before she did, people are going to look at me like I'm absolutely nuts. So I really struggled with talking about it. But I had that similar thing. Like I knew how she was going to die, and I describe it more as like almost like I dream it. I'll have dreams sometimes where I see something, and it doesn't always register in the moment. It's almost more like a deja vu moment. Like something will happen, and I'll be like, "Oh my god, I've seen this before." It's like a deja vu moment. I'm like, "I've been here. I know what this person's getting ready to say because I've seen it." Almost like sparks back in my head. And so I had a similar experience in my upbringing as well with that. And then the other thing too, that I know I've talked to you a lot about. I also grew up very religious in the Christian church, and as I kind of got older and I started having more and more questions surrounding the paranormal, that the church wasn't really able or willing to answer for me. That's where I kind of, in a way, stepped away from that. And yeah, so I completely understand that side of things.
Right. Yeah, a couple thoughts for me. I mean, I also grew up very much in the Christian church, and when I started to gravitate away from that, I actually spent 3 years very intently studying Judaism, believe it or not.
Oh, I don't think I
And
knew that.
I don't know if I ever mentioned that. It was a fantastic 3 years. I learned so much. I met some amazing people. There's pieces of that journey that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. But in the end, that was not the path I was meant to be on.
Mhm.
The other thought that came to me, I have to throw this out there now that you say it. When you mentioned having that dream about your grandma Sandy,
Mhm.
I have to wonder if that's not part of why she came through to me so clearly that time.
Well, right, that's kind of like where I wonder about that too, like why she came through in the way that she did. Um, which I guess actually kind of pivots into the next part of the topic today, which is why Crooked Path is a thing. Which, since I'm the one that originally reached out to you about it with this crazy idea, I guess I'll start that off. Um, so to kind of backtrack, when I was talking about my paranormal team called Belmont Paranormal Society that I had started with my long life friend Gage Warrington. So we were doing that group, and one of the places that we just so happened to book was the Fairfield County Infirmary, where I first met you, which was a awesome experience. If you guys haven't had a tour by him, he gives the best tours. So
Oh,
just keep that in mind. Um, gives the absolute best tours. There was so much information historically and with what was actually going on in the building. And it was funny because as we're going throughout the tour, we started to connect because we started talking about some of the similar experiences we had had. We were particularly talking about like this idea that like with these malevolent spirits pretending to be like something they're not and like innocent things like a child or something like that. And we were talking about that theory, and we really started to connect. And I remember at one point I just got this urge. I was like, I need to like get this guy's contact information in case I ever like need to talk to him again. So I did. We exchanged numbers and everything, and I remember sitting there thinking, I was like, I hope this guy doesn't think I'm weird based off of this whole interaction here, because like it was such a weird way that it happened.
if it makes
Um,
you feel better, that's not why I thought you were weird. There were a bunch of other reasons why I thought you were weird.
that's fair. That's a fair assessment there. So then I remember when we were talking about places to go. I mentioned the Belair House, which at that point in time you hadn't been there, so I thought that was pretty cool. And then you had mentioned to me the Ross House, which coincidentally enough were like right down the street from each other. And me being so local to the area, I don't know how I never heard of the Ross House before that. I obviously had heard of the Belair House and I had went there, but I'd never heard of the Ross House. So you bringing that up to me was like such a weird coincidence for me. So I remember whenever we had booked the Ross House, we went ahead and booked it and everything, and we were getting ready to go there. I think it was maybe a week before we went. I'm sitting on my couch and I'm just like planning, this idea of what we're gonna do when we get there, and experiments I want to do when I get there. And all of a sudden, I'm like, hey, that Christopher guy that I met at Fairfield County Infirmary, he was the one that brought this place up to me, and he was so cool to talk to, and I was really interested in the gifts and abilities that you possess and stuff like that. So I was like, I gotta reach out to this guy. Like it's probably like a shot in the dark that you're going to be available to come out with me, especially with all the crazy stuff that you're always doing. But I was like, I got to reach out to this guy and see if there's any chance that he'd be available. So I did. I sent you a text, and I remember you were like, you know what? Coincidentally enough, I'm off that weekend, and I'd be happy to come out and hang out with you guys. And the experience that we had at the Ross House, which I'm pretty sure you feel the same way that I do about it. It was one of those once in a lifetime experiences that I will never be able to forget. It was just such a wild spiritual journey and the things that we encountered there, especially for me, to kind of give a little bit of background on what you just talked about with, you picking up my grandma Sandy. It was literally day 2 of us being at the Ross house, and we're sitting at the table just doing a tarot card reading, because that was actually my introduction into tarot, and I was really interested about how it works and stuff like that. So we were literally just doing a tarot card reading about what was going on, and the fact that literally as soon as my dad came in the room, because again, because my dad was the one that really introduced me to the paranormal, with like, we watched all those shows together. I'm sitting there the night before as we're experiencing the things that we experienced, and I'm like, this guy is like something else. Like, this shit that he can do is like so cool. So I, like, immediately the next morning I called my dad and I was like, hey, you got to come out and meet this guy. Like, this guy's amazing. Like, just everything. So, and I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell anybody that he was coming. So I kind of wanted it just to be like a surprise and everything. So the fact that we're doing that tarot card reading, and after that my dad just walks into the room, and you immediately stop what you're doing, look up at him, and you're just like, hold on, like, something's coming. Like, I gotta stop what I'm doing right now. And the fact that you were like, does the name Sandra mean anything to you? And he's like, but you're like, but the name Sandra doesn't quite feel right. Like, Sandy, like, is that like, and my jaw just dropped, because that was my grandmother Sandra, but nobody called her Sandra. She was always known as Sandy. But it's one of those things that, like, you can't look that up. Like, that, you know what I mean? Like, there's no way to look up that, like, yeah, her name was Sandra, but how would you know that? How would you know that everybody called her Sandy? So that, like, for me, was the moment where I was like, this guy is special. So this leads into, we do a couple more. I do a few more investigations with Belmont Paranormal Society. One of them being where we go back to the Fairfield County Infirmary, and again, I reach out to you, and we do another investigation. And at this point, like, that like friendship was starting to really grow and prosper in the way that, like, we were doing things, and just again, like, the crazy stuff that we get when we come together and we do an investigation, the way that we're able to get answers. It was so prominent to me that, like, months later, I'm literally sitting at work, because I really liked what was going on with the Belmont Paranormal Society, but I started to think, like, I really want to take my paranormal investigating to the next level, to really reach that next level in what I'm doing, and really devote my entire life to doing this. And so I was sitting there and I'm brainstorming, like, how am I going to do this? And I just got that idea, and I was like, why don't I just actually reach out to Christopher and see if he would at all be interested in creating a group together and documenting the crazy things that we do. And so I had texted you, like, literally as soon as I got out to the truck, and I don't even think it was like 10 minutes later you replied.
Which is unheard of. I mean,
Right.
anybody that knows me knows that it can take 7 to 10 business weeks for me to respond to a message.
It was funny too, because, like, literally when I texted you on Facebook Messenger, because there was like 1 or 2 messages that I had sent you, like, through text messages, that you hadn't quite responded to yet. And I remember sitting there thinking, I was like, this guy's about to think that I'm like some weird stalker that's like won't leave him alone. So I was actually really nervous about it. So I remember, I think I even texted in there like, hey man, I swear to God, I'm not trying to like be the weird stalker guy that won't leave you alone. I just thought let me throw my hat in the ring and see if there's any way that you'd be interested in really diving into something here. And luckily for me, you did. And I'll kind of like turn it over for your side of the whole thing.
When I first, well, I'm going to back up a little bit here. Over the years, I've had a lot of people approach me about doing something like this. And quite often, the timing either wasn't right, or my gut just said no. And when I first read your message, it was an instant yes in my mind and in my gut. I did not have a moment of hesitation. And I mean, really, other than the experience we'd had at the Ross House and at FCI, we still really didn't know each other all that well.
No.
And I mean, the interactions we had were very spaced out. Like, I think you were at FCI in February, and then was Ross June.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then FCI again was the end of the year,
It was
November, December.
Yeah, it was December 1st. So like, yeah, the experiences that we had were all very like spaced out.
So just the fact that I really, really didn't know you all that well, and still my gut reaction, not even feeling, just reaction was, yes, this absolutely needs to happen.
Right.
And then it's just kind of snowballed from there.
It's definitely snowballed in a multitude of ways. Like, just like even in the short span, because like Crooked Path has only been up and running for, I think, 2 months now. I think that's pretty accurate, and it's been up for about 2 months now.
Yeah,
Just
about that.
just in the way that not only in how the group has progressed, but honestly, just in our personal relationship as friends and business partners and stuff has like went from like you said, we barely knew each other to now like I consider you a very, very close friend that I will cherish for the rest of my life. And yeah, um I guess I don't even really know what more to say about that. It's almost like even though we haven't known each other quite that long, it's also like that feeling like I have known this guy for a very long time. It's an interesting relationship, and the the way that it's grown and prospered since we first met till now has been amazing, and I can't wait to see where it goes in the future as well.
Absolutely. I've enjoyed every bit of it so far and am very excited for what's to come next.
It's also probably doesn't hurt, that I'm like 3 for 3 on intuition all the time. That's probably a good reason as to why that is. I gotta
Well,
I gotta say it real quick just to give some people some understanding on what that means. When we were at the Bill Manor, which part 1 and part 2 are now up on YouTube, and I can't wait to get part 3 out there for you guys to see that. Um, we were, as everybody pretty much already knows, with Christopher's abilities and gifts, he is constantly really good about finding the answers to questions that we need to like solve whatever mystery we're trying to solve in an investigation. And that's kind of like the side of things that I'm still getting new to. And so we were at the Bill Manor, and I had like 3 separate occasions where I had an intuition about something, and it ended up being right. So I was started like keeping track of all the things that I got right. So I remember at one point I was like, "Oh, I'm right." I was right, number 1, and then number 2, and then I was 3, and it just became like a snowball joke now that like anytime like we talk about anything, I'll just be like we joke that like if we meet a random person and they're just like, "So why did you guys want to create Crooked Path?" And I'll be like, "Well, it probably was the fact that we went to an investigation one time and I was 3 for 3 on intuitions. Like, can you say the same?" Like, that's kind of like a little bit of backstory on what that joke is, and you'll probably hear us say that a lot. And Christopher has his own sort of catchphrase, if you want to call it too, that has kind of become a joke too. I love it too because like you'll see a lot where we'll be on the brink of something. So as you get an intuition about something, or you get something that you know is meaningful, you'll just sit there and be like, "I have a thought, but I'm gonna hold on to it for right now." And it's like it's so suspenseful in the moment. I'll be sitting there and you'll say that, and I'll be like, "What is it? I need to know what it is. Please just tell me." So it's also whenever you tell me like I'm not gonna hold on to it like for that long, I'm like, God, because the suspense is killing me right now.
I've learned to do that. Whenever I can give you that little bit, that it's only going to be a little bit longer, that I'm going to hang on to it, I will.
Right. So I just wanted to give a little bit of backstory on that because I feel like that's something that we're going to end up saying a lot.
And then it's going to end up on t-shirts.
It's 100% going to be on t-shirts. 1000%.
I don't know. You were headed for 7 for 7 until,
Oh, it's
your, your
yeah.
spirit guide had to humble you.
Yeah, she straight up did too. Oh my god. Oh, it's crazy.
They're good at that.
They're good at humbling, same as Ed. You know, he's really good about humbling me and making sure I know that, I'm a bitch. You know, they do that quite often.
Well, I know that's something that we're going to touch on in our next episode, but since we opened that door,
Yeah.
why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about who Ed is, since anybody who saw our Bill Manor episodes, I think mostly 2 is when he was referenced.
Yeah. Yeah, he
Go
didn't
ahead and
get
talk
brought up.
about that.
Yeah, I definitely will. And again, like he said, so um, for our next episode, we're gonna really dive into like the equipment we use and kind of like the way that we go about doing an investigation. So you guys will get a little bit more of a background into it and a little bit more of the backstory of this whole crazy story that we've got going for us right now. But I will go ahead and touch a little bit on the story behind Ed and kind of how I got connected to him in a way. So Ed is a spirit known as Ed Hetherington from the Belair House in Belair, Ohio. And as I said before, the Belair House is actually an investigation that I did very early in the stuff that I was doing with Belmont Paranormal Society before I had even met Christopher. And we went there to do an investigation, and everybody talks about a really malevolent energy that is there in the house, and there's not necessarily a name or anything associated to that. It's just, some people will call it a demon, some people might call it an egregore or something. Like, it just depends on who you're talking to and what they might uh, classify it as. But all I know from my personal experience from being there is that there's definitely something very evil, very malevolent there, and it is powerful. Um, but anyway, we have this idea when we were there, based off of the evidence that we were capturing, that there was the malevolent being that was in the house that was almost kind of like a puppet master to the other spirits that was in the home. And one of those spirits underneath of him was the spirit of Ed Hetherington, which, for those who don't know anything about the history of the Belair House, the story behind Ed Hetherington and what he did in that house was Ed was one of the people that had essentially been a family member in the house at one point, and he had an older sister named Lyde Hetherington, and she was kind of like a mother figure to Ed in a sense that she was much older than he was, and she really is the one that took care of him. And so whenever Lyde had died of, I think it was a heart attack in the living room. I
I
think
think so.
I think it was a heart attack in the living room. I know it was in the living room for sure because that's where I ended up sleeping that night, and I was like, "Fuck!" I just slept where like Lyde had a heart attack. But um, so she died of a heart attack, and Ed became really distraught and started looking for answers and trying to connect with her. So he ended up bringing in a bunch of psychic mediums and started doing a lot of ritual seances in the house to try and connect with Lyde. And through multiple mediums and paranormal investigators doing evidence searching and stuff like that in the house, investigating, they believe that Ed opened up like 17 portals throughout the home, which is likely what would have brought in this possible malevolent spirit and then is what continues to feed what is there. And so Ed is almost like, from the evidence that we captured, we believe him to be like a puppet to this thing. So while we were there, and it was really attacking me in a sense, because as Christopher already knows, and you guys will get to see as we continue to do stuff, I'm very good at antagonizing malevolent spirits. It's kind of like what I do. I'm not afraid to go toe to toe and just have an argument with a negative spirit. It's just what I do. And so that's what we were doing, and it started to physically attack me in the sense that I remember being up in the attic, and at one point, it said stop, and I said, stop what? And it said provoking, and I was like, okay, cool. What's gonna happen if you don't stop provoking? At what's gonna happen if I don't stop provoking you right now? And my one buddy who was under the Estes method at the time, he rips off the headset and he's like, I'm not about to say what I think I just heard. And I was like, I think you have to say it because I think it's going to be a direct answer to what I just asked. And he's like, girlfriend will die. Which, funny enough, like right at that point in time, like my wife and I had just gotten married like a month before that. So like I'm not saying that he was necessarily like, I don't know that he was for sure talking about my wife and just threw out girlfriend there. I don't know, but like it was a weird like coincidence that like that's what I asked and that's what it said. And then like there was also another point in the attic where it said I was gonna get sick, and then like immediately afterwards, like I got super nauseous to the point where like I felt like I was gonna throw up and I needed to leave the room. But I had this idea in my mind. I was like, that's what it wants. It wants me to leave, and that's what it's doing. So I just toughed it out, and I stayed in the room to just kind of face what was there. And almost as quickly as the sickness came, when I had that revolution that like I need to stay here and I need to power through this, it went. It left my body, and I was able to continue the session. And then basically whenever we left the Blair house, we didn't really think anything of anything. But whenever we had went to the Ross house with you, um, actually no, I'm sorry, this happened before that. We was at the Prospect place, and this was in between the investigation at FCI after we had met you, but then it was also before the Ross house investigation where we officially did our first one together. We went to a place called the Prospect place up in Zanesville. And I remember we were doing an Estes method in, I think it was just like the parlor room of the place. And I really wasn't expecting anything of it. But we're doing the Estes method, and I hear Gage under the headset go, he is coming. And I'm like, okay, who is he? And immediately he says, Ed. And I just got like wide eyes, like, no freaking way. And I was like, well, hold on, let me back up. Like, maybe it's not the Ed that I'm thinking of. So I asked, I was like, Ed, where are you from? And then he says Belair. And I'm like, holy shit. That didn't just happen. So, and then that was kind of like the first moment that I knew there was some sort of attachment with Ed, which then led into us furthering down that road to find out what it was, where, like, how it happened, stuff like that. And basically, we came to the conclusion that Ed is attached to Gage. And of my knowledge of Ed being a very negative, hateful spirit, I've always tried to sever that attachment, which led to the thing that we did at the Ross house, where we attempted to sever that attachment, which, if you've seen the Bill Manor, you will know that that was not successful in what we did, because Ed came through and continued to just be very hateful towards me. So
Sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but I can't help it.
It's funny. Like, I can't, like, it's every time. I know when it's going to be Ed, because it's when Gage is around. The attachment is with Gage. And every time that Gage is there and we're doing something, that key phrase is he is coming. And then I'll be like, okay, I know where this is going. Shortly afterwards, at some point, he's going to say Ed. And I think Ed knows this, and I think this is also partially why in that episode he wanted me to leave first. Because he didn't announce who he was until I left. He waited. As soon as I leave, that's when he comes through in the really creepy voice, my name is Ed.
Right.
So like that's kind of how I always know it's gonna be him. And then immediately, as soon as I know he's there, that's when he starts like calling me names and stuff like that. And he's always trying to get me to invite him in. And I made that funny remark at one point where like he says invite me, and I'm just sitting there like I'm not gonna invite you in. That's not how this works. You know that. Ed over here thinking it's my first day in ghost hunting. Like I'm gonna invite him in. Like come on, get
I
out of here.
almost died when I actually watched that because we were separated at that time. I didn't hear you say it in real time. I almost died when I saw that.
I think that's what's interesting too. Like a lot of the times we don't separate, or at least we haven't as of this current moment, other than that occasion in Mill Manor. We haven't had a situation where we separate, but I think those moments are funny too because like some of the things that happen whenever we do separate, I think that'd be interesting too.
Wait till we do and I get attacked by a bat and all you hear is my screams from wherever I'm at.
I'll be like, oh no, Ed got him, and it'll just be a bat.
Oh no, if ever you hear me high pitched schoolgirl screaming, you know it's a bat.
I will know it's a bat, but you've got your bat hat, so that's cool.
I do. The bat hat has changed my life. I've technically never seen a bat while wearing it.
Right. So I mean, in that sort of way, it has to work.
I mean, this week I got through Waverly, Poasttown, Old Hospital, FCI, Ohio State Reformatory, and Madison, and didn't see a single bat.
I will say too, like in the places that I've been with you while you've worn the hat, I've not seen a bat either. So I mean, I'm slowly becoming a believer in it.
I have to throw this out there. I don't know if it's the hat. The hat makes me feel better. It really does. I don't know if that's what keeps them away, though. I bought that hat in September of last year for my return trip to West Virginia State Penn. Because the last time I was there, the bats absolutely ruined my night. Like I was going home. It was awful.
Right.
Right before that trip back to Moundsville, I found a dead bat on the floor in the doctor's waiting area at FCI. And I ended up picking him up, putting in a box, wrapping him with some tissue and specific herbs and a few crystals. I've got to give the visual of how I picked him up. Picture me with like the bat net on top of him and then sliding the shovel underneath the bat net just in case it reanimated. But still, I picked it up and did all this. I took that box out back to the cemetery and I buried it with the intention of also burying some of my fear. I do not think I was successful in burying any of my fear. You saw the way I was ducking through the hallways at Madison the other day, just where I know the bats are usually. I didn't even have to see one, and I was still freaking out. But somehow I think it triggered something that just I've been fairly lucky since then. I can count the number of times I've actually seen a bat on one hand since September.
Right.
And before that, I feel like I was seeing them everywhere I went.
Right.
I will say there was also an incident at FCI after that where I did see one. We were standing on the second floor women's side where the stairs are, where you go up or down, and one flew around the corner, and it was massive. And I screamed, but it wasn't the usual scream. It didn't come from my toes.
Oh, okay.
It's like it was more out of habit than anything. And even when I turned to leave, I just like walked out of the room. I didn't run out of the room. So when I actually saw one, it was different after I did what I did in burying that bat.
Right.
I don't know. I did it in almost a ritualistic fashion. And I mean, rituals work. So.
I would say, yeah, I mean, that would make sense to like give some sort of like energetic power behind what you were doing, which I mean, I think the idea of energetic power is going to be an episode that we do at some point, talking about our theories on all that. I think that'd be an interesting episode to do at some point.
Oh, absolutely. That's going to be a long one.
That's probably not even going to be a single one. That's probably going to be like a series at some point, you know?
Oh, yeah, we can talk about that forever. There's so much. There's so many experiences that tie into that.
Right.
And I mean, just wait with the road that's about to open up for you with what we're about to do when it comes to
Right.
energy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be really, really, really big. But I think that's like to kind of like, put this episode one in a little bit of a conclusion here. I think that's what's going to be really cool and why I'm so excited about this podcast style of doing things, because it's really going to give us a chance to talk about all the things that everybody doesn't really get to see on the movies that we produce and stuff like that. They get a little bit more background about who we are, our personalities, the experiences that we have that you don't get to see on camera, and we get to talk a lot about a lot of theory. And once we start going live on these, the actual like opportunities that we'll have to have with people communicating with us and giving their thoughts and stuff on everything that we do and talk about. It's such a cool journey that we're going to get to experience, and I can't wait to see where it goes. And so I'm really hoping that everybody has enjoyed this first episode and getting a little bit of a background and personality as to why we do the things that we do, how it kind of started a little bit for us, and how Crooked Path kind of came to be in a way. And as we continue to talk about this week after week, it's going to unfold a little bit more, as well, with some of the things that we talk about. Like we said, next week's episode is going to be more about the equipment that we use and why we use it the way we do, and some of the experiments that we try to perform, and a little bit of background into this crazy story that is unfolding in multiple different layers of what's going on.
Next time, too, I'll talk about Lisa's story, how that's a name that seems to keep coming up over and over again. People need to know who Lisa is. So since you explained Ed today, I'll explain Lisa next time.
I think, right, there's a lot of them that are going to have to be explained. There's Lisa, obviously we talked about Ed, and then
Zeke.
Zeke. Yeah, I mean, people need to know that backstory of the story, and then also like the fact that we got some evidence that puts me into that story as well. I'm interested to see what name ends up popping up for that one as well. But obviously, with the stuff that we just did at OSR and then Madison, and then we're getting ready to do this weekend, the name Jane is going to obviously come up, and we're gonna have to talk a lot about that as well. So there's a lot of things that we have to cover. So that's where next week's episode we're really going to dive deep into the history of that and get into it, and I'm really excited to talk about that.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing.
Well, again, just to put out there to kind of put this episode in conclusion, my name is Noah, and I'm really excited for you guys to kind of be on this journey with us. Can't wait to get into it, and hope you guys enjoyed today's episode.
Yep, and I'm Christopher, and I think it's very worthwhile for you to stick with us, because this is going to be an amazing journey for all of us.
All right.
We'll see you next time.
See you next time, guys.